Well, we're coming to you from the Edwards family studio, which is our guest room. And this is a message for the Good News family and anyone else who might be listening and watching for Easter. And of course, it's Easter, so we start with, "The Lord is risen." Did everybody do "The Lord is risen" indeed? The Lord is risen. The Lord is risen indeed. Today's scripture comes from Gospel of Mark, chapter 16, verses 1 through 8. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He's not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. All right, now that we're all in the Easter groove mood, the Lord is risen. Okay, just in case that one also caught you by surprise, the Lord is risen. The Lord is risen indeed. Actually, I'm curious, what punctuation did you put on the end of that? Punctuation, the mark you put at the end of a sentence. Those are called end marks. There actually aren't that many options. In fact, officially, there are only 3 ways to end a sentence. Nope, colons and semicolons don't actually end a sentence. They're only a pause. In fact, if you ever see someone with a semicolon tattoo, that's what it symbolizes. Whatever is happening right now is only a pause. It isn't the end. There's more to come. Now, the 3 ways to end a sentence, the 3 official ways, a period, a question mark, and an exclamation point. Now, punctuation wasn't really a thing until universities started to come into being in the 13th century. Yeah, it's interesting to think about a statement like, "The Lord is risen," "The Lord is risen indeed," with different punctuation setting the tone. The Moravian liturgy for Easter gives it to us with an exclamation point. We're used to it being a proclamation. It's often the first thing we hear in church on Easter morning. A leader shouts it out, maybe flings open the sanctuary door and shouts it, and then we all shout our reply, "The Lord is risen! The Lord is risen indeed!" And then the accompanist or band comes in with a big triumphant selection, maybe, "Jesus Christ is risen today, hallelujah." That's worthy of an exclamation mark indeed. Actually, that's worthy of what typesetters called it in shorthand, a bang. "The Lord is risen indeed, bang." Well, knowing that punctuation didn't show up for about 1,000 years or so after the Gospels were written, what if we didn't use that bang, that exclamation mark? Actually, in Luke, where we get the closest scriptural text, we get a comma, because the statement that the Lord has risen indeed is followed by a bit more. It's followed by, "and he has appeared to Simon." Yet not until we get somebody giving it a yes and statement do we get something with a bang. Now, how about a period? Just a straight up statement of fact. It kind of turns it into a phrase of confirmation. You know, how 2 Christians might greet each other and exchange words, like spies giving a sign, countersign recognition. "The Lord is risen. The Lord is risen indeed." Sorry, too quick there. I'll give the sign. You give the countersign. Ready? "The Lord is risen." I think it actually works best when you include the nod. A resolute statement of fact. This is who we are. This is what we say. To be honest, probably the punctuation you would use if it were routine. A little bit going through the motions. We're all there sometimes, when one day is sort of like the next. Our faith is there. Our faith is solid, but our faith isn't being exclaimed and proclaimed. Just the facts. The Lord is risen indeed. What about the third official end mark? We've got the exclamation point and the period. But what about the question mark? What happens to the sentence and the idea behind it when it's a question? The Lord is risen? The Lord is risen? It's a little tougher to add the word indeed without it sounding like a dismissal. The kind of question who you get asked by someone who knows you didn't do what you were told. Just checking, even though I'd heard your video game playing for an hour. Have you started cleaning your room? It's a dismissal by the disciples who weren't there. Glancing around with a shrug. I'm not seeing any Messiah. The Lord is risen indeed? But what about a straight up question? The kind based on wonder and amazement. The could it be true kind of question. You've just seen that the tomb is empty, and you've been told by a dazzling being that the one you seek is not here. He has been raised and is going before you. Wait, the Lord is risen? A question that likely echoed through the minds of Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome as they went back to the disciples to announce the resurrection. They may have even been repeating it out loud like a mantra, or bouncing it back and forth like an amplified rumor, until perhaps Mary of Magdala stood up in front of them and said, "Okay, this is what we know today. He was dead, and now he's not on that list anymore." Wait, the Lord has risen? The Lord has risen indeed? It can be the same question we have when we know we've been told to have faith, to do the next right thing, even something that is against our nature. Isolate instead of move closer. Step back instead of move in. When we look at numbers and wonder why more can't be done, wonder how long this will take, and what things will look like when we emerge, when we finally understand the impact on lives and livelihoods, when we rightfully cry out, my God, why have you forsaken us?" Or mutter, "God, we're kind of walking through the valley of the shadow of death. Sure could use that whole green pastures thing. Maybe some tidings of comfort and joy." We ask that question. The Lord has listened? The Lord has risen? The Lord has risen? And in preaching class, we're given the wisdom to never pose a rhetorical question without then giving an answer. Sometimes the answer is one you can shout. Sometimes it's one you need to whisper and hold on to. Tuck it into your pocket for the time you need a touchstone. The Lord is risen indeed. The bad news isn't the last word. In the end, everything is going to be okay, and if it's not okay, it's not the end. The Lord is risen indeed. Now you might have noticed back there that I mentioned 3 official end marks for a sentence. There's one more that needs a little attention, one that I think could be really useful as we celebrate resurrection in uncertain times. It's a modern mark developed by an American ad man, Martin K. Spector, just in 1962. Now, remember that the shorthand for an exclamation point is bang? So a question, or interrogate plus bang, it's called the interrobang. Okay, I wish I could put a graphic up on the scene for you to see, but that's not my thing. So I'm going to invite you to imagine or grab a pencil and draw it out. You can look on the internet, just type in interrobang and search for it. You might see a graphic of it. It's a question mark and an exclamation point sharing the same dot. So a question mark with then the exclamation point drawn right down through the middle to share the same dot. Sometimes you'll see the same idea expressed with a question mark and an exclamation point right close together. Okay, that's an interrobang. But what is this odd punctuation for? And what does it have to do with proclaiming or questioning the risenness of the Lord? Or questioning and exclaiming at the same time? That's the point. Ha, the point, get it? Anyways, that's the point of the interrobang. It says you are interrogating or questioning and exclaiming at the same time. A sentence ending with an interrobang asks a question in an excited manner, expresses excitement or disbelief in the form of a question, or asks an excited rhetorical question. As Canadians, we're intimately acquainted with the nature of the interrobang. It's kind of our national punctuation mark, or rather our national sentence end mark. The Canadian A, that's properly punctuated with an interrobang. It never made it onto typewriter or computer keyboards, so you pretty much only see it as a question mark with an exclamation point right after it, that combo. It's not a bad way to think of the disciples expressing what's happening, especially in our reading from Mark's Gospel. The disciples have the best news ever, but they're trying to figure out how to fit it into the world around them that isn't the same as it was just a few weeks before. So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Questioning, unsure, boldly proclaiming and exclaiming all at the same time. Definitely worthy of an interrobang. This year, more than ever, we're trying to figure out a new normal, trying to stay connected while remaining distant, unable to do what we do naturally as church, gathering, welcoming, leaning on each other, offering space for people to use, sharing hugs and passing the peace. We're exclaiming and proclaiming while at the same time questioning how we're going to be church for the next while. In the sure and certain hope that we are a resurrection exclaiming people in the midst of our questions and uncertainty of what normal is. So I think this year, my punctuation for our Easter proclamation is the interrobang. The Lord is risen. The Lord is risen indeed. It's actually kind of tough to get it naturally when you're really thinking about it that much. How about in really stereotypical Canadian fashion? Is that right, eh? That's a good response. That is that right, eh? Exclamation and questioning at the same time. The Lord is risen. Is that right, eh?